the mistakes perhaps that we made as we defined them spiritually end up being for the better, only because we get up and march on. Good morning, everyone. Today's subject is, what is it to fail spiritually? Well, it sort of reminds me of Mark Twain's experience of giving up smoking. He said, I've done it 100 times. It's the easiest thing in the world. And it's, do we fail spiritually? I mean, it's really ought to be the opposite, I would think. But, you know, in the history of the West, Christianity, perhaps the greatest failure of all time was the famous story of Judas. And yet, you know, those of us who study esoteric things, you know, I've read the apocryphal book of Judas, in which a case is made for, well, listen, if Judas hadn't betrayed Christ, he wouldn't have been crucified or resurrected. So he had a job to do, see? And so in the so-called book of Judas, Judas is suddenly the hero of the play. Well, that may be a stretch, at least in my personal opinion, but there's some truth to that. And what we see so often is we turn the sow's ear of our mistakes into a silk purse of spiritual awakening. We do that often. And it's the right attitude. How often have I seen, I'm sure all of us have seen, that the mistakes perhaps that we made as we defined them spiritually end up being for the better, but only because we get up and march on. Now, wasn't that long ago, a few years ago, most of you I see here today know that one of our ministers had an affair, and it was the end of her marriage. And at the time, she took a lot of brickbats, and justly so. And yet, those of us who know and love her, she lives at another Ananda community and has come up, has regained her spiritual search. You see, a mistake is the given. If you don't make any mistakes, even in your career, what to mention, or in your health, you're probably pretty boring, for starters. But nobody who has succeeded at anything has had anything but mistakes, okay? So the problem is we tend to identify so readily with our mistakes. And they're so much fun to make sometimes, too. But it's a question of getting up again. And that's why in the affirmation that I have the wisdom, the affirmation that I have the strength, the affirmation that I am not my mistakes. Yogananda had this phrase, it's a sin to call yourself a sinner. A saint is a saint who never gave up. And that's quite the opposite from the way a lot of us have been raised, or at least the way dogma is promulgated historically, and so on. And because we're in a new time. This is a different age. I had the opportunity to share with a few folks the other day at East West, the new East West in Edmonds, and talk about my book, which I get to go to Portland next week and do a series of talks about as well. But it's always a matter of the right affirmation. And it's a matter of a new thought. And what I was saying there, one of the things, is that, I mean, I was born a Christian. I love Jesus. I have great admiration for the story of his life and his living presence. But I have to ask myself, for myself, and I think I say this for many, many Christians, as key and focused and central is the crucifix, the crucifixion. How many people today find that an inspiration in your personal life? What I quoted was my old mother, God bless her soul, and she would say to me when I would complain, she'd say, son, offer it up to Jesus. And I think that's great advice, because we all have our problems. And when we have our problems, offer it up to the Christ in whatever name, form, or no name, no form is dear to you. Okay, life is full of those kinds of things. But I watched in the 1950s in my growing up, and then in the 60s, I even went away to study for the priesthood. I watched friends of mine, older than me, and then as I got older, I realized millions of priests, monks, and nuns throughout the 50s, 60s, and 70s left their vocations. Why? Was it just to have fun? No. Most of them had to have been sincere in their vocation. You see, there's been a great shift in what inspires truth seekers, what inspires devotees. And it's from basically, in a sense, in a very simplistic sense, the negative to the positive. Isn't there a song about the positive? How does it go?
Something, the negative, is the positive.
She's going to be in the choir real soon.
Don't mess with Mr. In Between.
That's right. But isn't it true? You know, as Americans, for what it's worth, we're basically pretty positive people, upbeat, generally speaking. And so this shift is far more reaching than I think even we understand, because it's so easy to identify with what I have coined this word, so I want you to pay attention, schmuckness. We just really get into our schmuckiness, okay? And I get that. I understand that. There's, if we didn't, we'd be unsufferably smug if we didn't at least identify with the fact that we are a work in progress. Okay, that's completely understandable. But still, some of the things that challenge us, our teacher, or founder of Ananda, Swami Kriyananda, who was a personal and direct disciple of Yogananda, whose teachings we follow here, he was told by Yogananda as a young monk that one of his shortcomings, failings in past lives had been a serious case of doubt. And I won't go into the stories that were revealed to him in different ways, but basically he said one of the reasons he became a lifelong spiritual teacher was because I've had every doubt there is. And so to expiate my sin, my karma, his job, Yogananda told him, was to become a spiritual teacher, and so on and so forth. And so doubt is certainly one of the plagues that we find. Many good reasons. After all, religion, quote unquote, has given itself a very bad name in our time. And there's lots to turn our backs on for that. To doubt things is, part and parcel of what's happening on the planet today. The affirmation of my individuality is, again, a new form of consciousness that did not exist very long ago. And you think of the medieval consciousness of being born, most people were serfs or slaves or peasants or what have you, and you had no aspirations. You simply had to survive. You had to offer it up. Forbearance was the guiding principle for a spiritual living. But that isn't the case now. We expect to have opportunities. We expect to have the rights even. Okay, a lot of that's ego, I get that. And that's why we need a new form of ego, self-realization. Nothing's new under this sun that sometimes comes out. One time Swami Kriyananda was speaking at our old old place down in Roosevelt District, and he's talking about the sun. Remember that, some of you? And suddenly he stopped. Sunshine, he said, look it up in the dictionary. He was from California, I grew up in California, and I grew up praying for rain. And so then I get sent up here. Oh, well. I didn't quite get it right, but I'm happy with it in any case. So doubt is really one of our big issues. And self-doubt is generally where we start, but when we get tired of doubting ourselves, after all, it gets boring after a while, right? We decide that we're going to doubt everybody else. And so we become, the world-famous critic, right? And then we waffle back and forth between doubting ourselves and then critiquing other people. And we're pretty darn good at it. And so, that's one of the big challenges we face. Another one, when you're on the spiritual path and when you do have a community, is you're looking around and you say, oh, that person, oh, she's awesome, really spiritual. And that guy, he's a schmuck. And so what we tend to do in community and association with one another is that we look up to some, and then when they fall, we kick them, And so we compare ourselves constantly to other people. You never know when the axe is going to fall or the person is going to ascend. The example given, I think it was Swami Kriyananda who gave the example anyway, I heard him say it a million times, which is, and believe me, I don't have a lot of experience in this, but I'm told that when you're trying to get a nail out of the board, and you've got that claw, and you're jerking on the claw, you never know when that damn nail's going to boing, fly out, right? Well, that's how it is for us. That's why Jesus said, like a thief in the night, you never know when the Spirit will lift you. And so what's the key ingredient in both cases? Humility. Isn't that interesting? But not the kind of Christian humility as if the Christians invented the darn thing. It's the understanding of basically how much of a nothing I am. I could tell a joke about nothing, couldn't I? This joke makes the rounds of the Muslims, the Hindus, the Buddhists. It's everywhere. So you've heard it a million times. You pretend you never heard it. Okay? So there was this janitor in the back of the church, and he's doing his janitor thing. And I'll just call it the head rabbi. He comes in and he runs on the aisle and he throws himself on the altar and says, I'm nothing, I'm nothing. And so from the back, his next in line guy, whatever they're called, junior rabbi, I guess, he sees that and he's thinking, that's cool. So he runs down the aisle. He throws himself on the altar. I'm nothing, I'm nothing. So the janitor is thinking, this is hot stuff. So he runs down and throws himself on the altar. I am nothing, I am nothing. So the head rabbi turns to the other guy and says, look who thinks he's nothing. As Swami Kriyananda put it as a young monk, when Master, as we call him, Yogananda, encouraged him to get more devotional, because Kriyananda was rather intellectual by his own lights. He found himself one day proud of his humility. So I don't mean that kind of humility. I mean the humility that is self-honest, maybe ruthlessly self-honest. I mean, look at the billions of galaxies. Talk about being nothing. I mean, there isn't any field of endeavor where there isn't somebody better than you and somebody worse than you. Okay? So humility just means to accept the truth of what it is. What we really are not, I mean, we should do our best. We should make the world a better place. Okay, wonderful. And it's wonderful to have a creative skill. I think of our musicians and so forth. It's fun to be creative. And it's wonderful to be successful, no doubt about it. But what we really are is that spirit. And our success, to the degree that we tune into that reality, and then from there see it everywhere, is what opens the heart and brings satisfaction. Recently, I bring these books up, and then I never forget to read them. Let me think, oh, I know, I'm going to read this. You're going to hear it anyway. This is from the Bhagavad Gita, and Swamiji used to quote from this all the time. And I've never had big problems with being a doubter. I'm really full of myself, as you can see, so that's not been my problem. But you were supposed to laugh. This is the ignorant, the person who lacks devotion, the doubt-ridden, all these, Krishna says, must perish. The man of vacillating temperament finds no happiness in this world or the next. For him, supreme bliss is not possible. And I do know a number of people for whom doubt, the inability to make a decision, the inability to move forward in life is an issue. Most typically, when you're young and trying to find your way, of course, that's an obvious stage of life where you confront all the choices that you have. But such a person, such a doubter of any age, is someone who can never really find inner security. But what I was going to say was, what came to me in a recent blog I entitled "Looking for a Friend," and we see it clearly in the affirmation that we just did a moment ago, that one of the aspects of self-realization, one of the aspects of the new dispensation, the new understanding, granted nothing's new, but the new expression of truth that is coming to the world through many different sources, but including Yoganandaji and his lineage, is the fact that, as I like to put it, life is an inside job. And what this means is, partly I talk about this in my book, but what came to me as I was writing was just to what extent the reality that we live in isn't so much, I mean, for most of us, we're blessed with, we have food and shelter and we have the basics, and that's a great blessing. Of course, there are so many that do not. But what occupies our minds, our hearts, our lives, our energies is primarily completely invisible. It's the consciousness of our feelings and our thoughts, our hopes, our desires, our fantasies, our fears. All those things occupy 90-some% of our energy. And I made the analogy in the book that 94% of the universe is AWOL. It's missing. Energy, dark energy and dark matter. And basically what this points to from a metaphysical standpoint is that the world is comprised of consciousness. And that pair of eyes, our eyes are looking outward and seeing the world. Our thoughts are looking outward and judging the world. Do we ever ask, who is looking? Who is judging? The friend of friends, this is self-realization. When we turn the eyes of our attention, the eyes of our interest, the eyes of our heart inward to see, St. Francis said, what you are looking for is who is looking. This is the tale of the musk deer that can sometimes throw itself off a cliff in its eagerness and its wild abandon to figure out where the scent, the beautiful scent, comes from. It ends up killing itself accidentally. And the scent of joy that we are seeking is an inside job. But nature has wired us to be so preoccupied through the senses and the world around us, necessarily. That's not a judgment, it's just simply a fact. But what we have been graced with in the wiring that God has given this human form, and in the awakening that has come through those who have achieved it down through the ages, is the counsel to know thyself, to go within. Someone is seeking us, and that someone is within us. And I'd like to end this with just a portion of a poem that Yoganandaji loved dearly. It's The Hound of Heaven by Francis Thompson. I fled him down the nights and down the days. I fled him down the arches of the ears. I fled him down the labyrinthian ways of my own mind. And in the mist of tears I hid from him. And under running laughter, up-visted hopes I sped and shot, precipitated. Adown titanic glooms of chasmid fears from those strong feet that followed after. But with unhurrying chase and unperturbed pace, deliberate speed, majestic instancy they beat, and a voice beat more instant than the feet. All things betray thee who betrayest me.